New York City's beautiful, iconic Brooklyn Bridge. And the reason that it's empty right now is because the city just banned people from using it to make a living. Which means although the bridge may look very nice, some people now have no idea how they're gonna provide for themselves.
The city is saying enough is enough when it comes to vendors clogging up pedestrian walkways on the Brooklyn Bridge and other city bridges.
A new city rule that went into effect at midnight banned street vendors from selling items on all city bridges.
What's going on in your mind? How are you feeling this morning?
I mean, how else can I be feeling, when you can't pay the bills and get stuff,
Crowds grew too big earlier, which is why cops came to shut them down.
I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do.
This is the only way we get our money to feed our kids and to pay our bills.
Are you serious? So people came here and they said, go back to your country.
Go back to your country.
That's horrible.
This is not anti-immigrant. This is about legal vending in the city so that all the stakeholders can be balanced. People who live here, people who visit here.
People couldn't walk. It's a public safety issue.
So recently the city decided to controversially ban vendors from selling things on the Brooklyn Bridge. Some people are thrilled with this, but others really aren't sure what they're gonna do next because this is where they were making a living and now they're not allowed to do it anymore.
Vendors along the Brooklyn Bridge pedestrian pathway rolled their carts off early tonight as the NYPD watched to ensure no one else sold any more hoodies, keychains, or mugs.
So before we get into the ramifications of this, you've got to understand that the Brooklyn Bridge is not just a major throughway, but it's also a major tourist hotspot. It's one of the most iconic landmarks anywhere in New York City. 100,000 cars a day drive over the bridge, 4,000 pedestrians walk the bridge, and around 2,600 bikes ride across it every single day, including me on my tiny electric moped or cycle. Now, all of what you see right here, which is empty, this was where people were selling things, but now they're all gone. There's also a 24-hour police presence on the bridge right now to stop vendors from trying to set up shop again. But some of the folks who were selling things here had been doing so for over a decade, and the best thing any business can do is to put itself in a high-traffic area. And 4,000 pedestrians a day, I'd say that makes this a pretty high-traffic area. And for that reason, the bridge has always been a hotspot for vendors to sell things. The views are crazy, too. There's really no way you can get a shot like this of Lower Manhattan from anywhere else. But you had local vendors like artists and musicians, and you've even got a fair amount of food vendors who are still here by the exit of this ramp that leads into Manhattan, New York City. But now that they're gone, that cultural melting pot that was kind of taking place on the bridge is gone. The bridge is now different. Some people like it, some people don't. And that has a lot to do with this bridge's history. Completed in 1883, this architectural marvel has stood the test of time. Connecting Manhattan and Brooklyn, and its iconic status has made it not only a cultural symbol, but also an icon of engineering excellence. The bridge took 14 years to complete and cost $15 million, which is like the same price of some of the apartments down here today. But what most people don't know is that when workers were building this bridge, they actually started suffering from a disease that was unknown at the time. Now today we know of this disease as decompression sickness, and the reason workers working on the bridge were experiencing it is because in order to make this thing, the bridge has to go way down into the riverbed, and it's so deep that when a pressurized chamber full of workers would get down to depth and then would try to resurface, they would experience the same phenomenon, decompression sickness, which scuba divers experience if they surface too quickly. People didn't know what it was at the time. The pylons rise 272 feet above the water. Here's one of them right now. I mean, just look at how massive and impressive these things are. What a marvel, seriously. But as of last week, regulations banning vendors from operating on the bridge are in effect, and unfortunately, this is a decision that benefits some people at the expense of others. However, city officials are arguing that this is a necessary step in order to preserve this bridge's beauty and to keep it from falling apart. But to the people who are making a living on this iconic piece of history every single day, to them, this decision is definitely a bad one.
Is banning all vendors, even those with a legal license, from selling their trinkets at the base of the Brooklyn Bridge, citing safety issues due to overcrowding.
So the city claims the reason for this ban is to improve the flow of foot traffic on the bridge and to maintain the safety of pedestrians. And let's be honest, trying to navigate a sea of like little tables and stuff on a bridge that's only 16 feet wide, that can be dangerous. Not to mention you've got crowds of people stopping to look at what's for sale and other groups that are trying to get across. Definitely a dangerous situation. And proponents of this ban of vendors on the bridge say that it removed the massive human traffic jams that were present here because of all the shops.
It's not only a sanitary issue, it's a public safety issue.
And to be quite honest with you, if you look at some of the footage that's present of how this bridge used to be, you can just see that there's a sea of people just kind of doing whatever they want. It's like a carnival or something. Apparently there were people serving beverages out here, which is like essentially the middle of the river. That's absolutely crazy. And there's not a whole lot of police out here in the middle of the bridge because police need resources to deal with crime or an issue if something happens. And it's tough to get like a big vehicle or something out here and have it here all the time because there's not a lot of room to begin with. Banning vendors from the bridge, definitely a bold move, but some people say that's the only move that could have been made because without taking some sort of step to limit the amount of chaos that was taking place on this bridge, it just would have been dangerous and unsafe. But again, to the people that were making a living up here and were abiding by the law-abiding vendors, to them, this is like just an absolute loss. What are they gonna do? How are they gonna make a living if they can't do it here, which is what they were used to doing for so long?
This is the only way we get our money to feed our kids and to pay our bills.
Raul and Yamara Salgado legally operate half a dozen of these carts along the pathway. They claim crowds.
Now, as a bridge pedestrian, personally, I like the way the bridge is now, but you can't help but feel bad for people who just lost their entire livelihood and now don't know what to do. That's tragic. If that happened to me, I wouldn't know what to do. And when you think about how some people had been selling on this bridge for near a decade, you can totally imagine there's a mortgage payment, there's a family, there's a car payment, there's a business that required investments in inventory and equipment to make it profitable and successful. But because of these new rules, that's no longer possible. And all of that investment, all of that time and energy is worthless at this point. And even though some of what was taking place on the bridge wasn't legal, other vendors were obeying the law. They had licenses, they had permits. They weren't up here doing things that were wrong. But now they're paying the price for the actions of others, which kind of ruined it for everybody. Also, a good number of the vendors are actually former veterans, and they're allowed to sell in public places without a license. Can you imagine fighting for your country and then they give you a job and then it gets taken away because of the actions of others that ruined it for you?
15 disabled veterans are hoping to get through, filing a lawsuit arguing it's unlawfully enforceable against veterans, citing a state law enacted in 1898, granting veterans the right to choose street vending as a source of income.
We're gonna have to see what happens with the lawsuit that's been filed by the vendors. But the big question in a lot of people's minds is how much were those vendors actually making by selling things on this bridge? How much money was at stake here, and what types of jobs would people need to get if they want to replace their income? The answer to that might shock you. So according to ZipRecruiter, a street vendor in New York City makes about $33 an hour. Now this is on average. That's gonna vary based on the time of year and based on the location of that vendor. And there's a good chance that vendors on this bridge, a very popular location, could have made more than that. And although the job market for street vendors in New York City is considered as being active, it's probably pretty hard to describe it that way to the people who used to have tables and shops set up over here. And $33 an hour, that's about $266 a day, $1,330 a week, around $70,000 a year in annual income. These jobs might not have made anybody millionaires, but by US standards, they were pretty decent. But now these jobs no longer exist, and all the people who are out here now have to find another spot to go and try to do the exact same thing. And since they're going to a new location, they don't know how much inventory to buy, they don't know what the demand is gonna be like. But to many New Yorkers, the idea of having an iconic landmark like the Brooklyn Bridge, full of people selling things, basically turning it into a rowdy carnival-style tourist trap, that's not something the people who walk across this every day to commute to an office or a job think is a good thing, even though those very same tourists contribute $50 billion a year to the city's economy. And the big question now is this ban an overall win for the city or an overall loss for the city? Unfortunately, that's complicated.
The overwhelming number of New Yorkers They want clean streets. They want an organized city.
Since the pandemic, the Brooklyn Bridge has exploded with popularity.
Well, it makes sense that the mayor, whose administration enacted this policy, is in favor of it. And he does have a good point. The bridge is very clear, it's very easy to walk. And he's right, residents do want clean streets. They do want clean bridges. Nobody wants to live in a zoo or to have to try and navigate through one when they're getting somewhere. And just as many of the vendors on the bridge appreciated working here for over 10 years, to many of the residents who now get to see it in the way it is today, with it being empty and clear of vendors, for them, this is a dream come true.
It became a hazard. It was just congested.
It was awful, and there was junk and garbage all over the place.
This woman has lived in New York her whole life and walks on the Brooklyn Bridge every day.
Those are definitely some good points. This is a charming bridge, and the experience now of being on it is actually better when you think about the history and being able to look at all of this and not really have anything distracting you from it. But how about tourists? Is the experience better for them as it is for residents, or is it worse for them now because the vendors are gone? So according to the news, tourists are perfectly happy with how things are right now. And that kind of makes sense if you traveled to New York and you wanted to visit the iconic Brooklyn Bridge. Seeing it in its natural state without a bunch of clutter is probably the best experience you could ask for. There's also lots of room to get great pictures and just take in the scenery while admiring all of the bridge's original details and history. And this is the reason people are here. And you can actually get right up close and touch some of these super old plaques that were put here when the bridge was completed. And it's now possible to admire all the details here without weird music or anything. And another thing that wasn't expected is that the tourists who come to visit the bridge, apparently people are now venturing out into the neighborhoods that surround the bridge. So while there might not be any business going on the bridge now, down here in the South Street Seaport, which is a little market with a grocery store and a bunch of stores and shops, now there's a lot more business happening down there. So now the bridge is cleaner, residents are happier, tourists are happier. But what about the people who were on the bridge trying to make a living? Where did they go, and what are they doing now that this place is off limits? That answer is very interesting. Business better here, or is it worse?
No, worse.
It's worse? Are these parks rangers, are they here to limit the amount of people that can be here?
Yeah, it's only 2 tables.
Only 2 tables. Do you know where everybody else went, or no?
So, mostly they went to Wall Street.
Wall Street area?
Yeah, maybe 2 or 3 people. The others stayed home.
Man, it's tough. So this is the new best location for people to be vendors now that the bridge is shut down. Vendors on Washington Street without authorization to vend on the property under the jurisdiction of New York City Parks will be removed. But the reason this is the next best location to have a store is because this is where foot traffic lets you off. The walkway is right there. And right up here you can see we've got foot traffic coming off the bridge, which is then gonna head over to Dumbo, Brooklyn. Also a very popular spot to take pictures, to hang out. There's a lot going on. It's even a very iconic place where people like to take pictures, right through the Manhattan Bridge. But as you can see, now that the bridge ban is in effect, there's a massive amount of security here, making sure that people who want to make a living aren't able to. And that, I mean, I run my own business. To have to go from making a living to being unable to provide for your family, or to having to ask the government for a handout, man, that's just tough. But as you can see, even on the sidewalk here, if there's a small crowd around this, there's not going to be a whole lot of room for people to get by. And that's something that the residents of Dumbo, Brooklyn, which starts right over here, were shocked by once it happened.
But in less than a New York minute, those vendors found a new place to set up shop. And tonight, some residents on the Brooklyn side of the bridge, not happy.
Are you serious? So people came here and they said, go back to your country.
Go back to your country.
That's horrible.
This is my country. I'm
citizenship
yeah. Now, this particular area where people are right now, there aren't apartments across the street. There aren't apartments on this side of the street. It's just a parking lot. There's nothing here except a little bit of foot traffic. Literally, on this side we've got the parking lot, and on this side we've got a field. Yes, the sidewalk is a little more crowded, but it's only traffic from the bridge. And that's the traffic that people were relying on for years to make a living and live their lives without asking for a handout or any kind of support. These were self-sufficient efficient New Yorkers. And the vendors that I was able to speak to here, they told me that a lot of the problems that were happening on the bridge were from people that didn't have a license and weren't legitimate sellers. Also, these shops, maybe they're your thing, maybe they're not, but these are incredibly clean. Look, there's no waste, there's no trash, there's no garbage. They're not making any mess. There's literally more trash in the actual street than there is on the sidewalk by any of these shops.
The strategy behind occupying this block is simple. This way you hit tourists as soon as they get off the Brooklyn Bridge on their way to the perfect shot of the Manhattan Bridge.
So all the economic activity that was taking place on the bridge has now been spread throughout this street and the rest of the city. But from the perspective of residents, these apartment buildings over here, these have some of the most expensive apartments anywhere in the city. And these are here in an old warehouse on beautiful, iconic Washington Street, which is one of the city's last remaining cobblestone streets. And believe it or not, this is a nicer, more expensive neighborhood than certain parts of Manhattan. It's historic, it's pretty, you've got the Manhattan Bridge right down there at the end of the street. And just like the bridge vendors had their lives upended after 10 years of being able to do their own thing, if you bought an apartment here within the last 10 years, you may have made that purchase without necessarily expecting that the neighborhood would drastically change in one evening after the city makes a law of kicking people off the Brooklyn Bridge. So it's understandable that people would be unhappy about that decision and about how that law affected them, but the right thing to do probably wasn't to come out and confront the vendors and tell them to get lost.
Shutting down the bridge and banning vending on the bridge would not be the answer, because what happens? These people need to make a living. A lot of them don't want to wait home or like stay home and get a handout from the government.
I think that guy makes a lot of good points. There's got to be some sort of middle ground for the people who need to make a living and can't anymore, and also for the people that might want to walk down the street. It needs to be fair for everybody, and a lot of the people that just lost their business don't think it was fair for them. What do you think the city should do? What do you think's fair? Let me know. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.